Liverpool, England. January 1942. A 19-year-old woman stands in front of a massive floor painted with grid lines. Each square represents a nautical mile of the North Atlantic. In her hand, a piece of white chalk. Around her, seasoned Royal Navy officers with decades of combat experience. They're watching with barely concealed skepticism. What they don't know yet is that this teenager is about to teach them how to win the Battle of the Atlantic. Her name is Janet Okell, and she's never been to sea. Before we dive deeper, if you enjoy uncovering these hidden stories from history, please like this video and subscribe. It genuinely helps more people discover these incredible tales, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. By early 1942, Britain was losing the war at sea, and losing badly. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than the Allies could replace them. In March 1941, 41 ships went down. By June, 61 ships. In November, 13 ships were destroyed in a single convoy attack. The numbers kept climbing, and with each sunken vessel, Britain moved closer to starvation and defeat. Britain imported almost everything: food, fuel, weapons, raw materials. The island nation couldn't sustain itself without constant supply from North America. Every sunken cargo ship meant less food on British tables, less fuel for RAF fighters, fewer bullets for soldiers fighting in North Africa and across Europe. Winston Churchill would later write that the U-boat threat was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. Not the Blitz, not the threat of invasion, the submarines. But here's the disturbing part. The Royal Navy's senior leadership refused to acknowledge that their tactics were fundamentally broken. They kept insisting that if they just built more escort ships, if they just trained harder, if they just had better sonar equipment, the problem would solve itself. They were wrong. The problem wasn't equipment or courage. The problem was that they were fighting a new kind of war with old tactics, and men were dying because admirals refused to admit they didn't have the answers. German submarines weren't fighting the way British doctrine predicted. They weren't attacking during daylight, submerged with periscopes raised, like submarines had in World War I. Instead, they were doing something the textbooks said was impossible, something that violated every assumption the Royal Navy had about submarine warfare. They were attacking at night, on the surface, sneaking into convoys from behind like wolves infiltrating a flock of sheep. U-boats could travel faster on the surface than submerged, and at night they were nearly invisible. They'd position themselves among the columns of merchant ships, fire torpedoes at point-blank range from multiple directions, then dive into the chaos before anyone could react. By the time British escort ships figured out what was happening, 3 or 4 merchant vessels would already be burning, their crews drowning in freezing Atlantic water, and the U-boats would be gone, vanished into the darkness. The German tactics had a name: Rudel Tactic, the Wolf Pack. Groups of 8 to 20 submarines would coordinate by radio, guided by Admiral Dönitz from his headquarters in occupied France. One boat would spot a convoy and report its position. The pack would assemble ahead of the convoy's route, lying in wait like an ambush. Then they'd wait for darkness, when visibility dropped to nothing and escorts couldn't see the low-profile submarines on the surface. They'd attack simultaneously from multiple directions, creating chaos and confusion. It was devastatingly effective, and the Royal Navy had no answer. Lieutenant Commander Peter Gretton, an escort commander who survived multiple Wolfpack attacks, later wrote something damning about British doctrine: "We assumed we'd have time to think. The Germans gave us seconds to act. Men died while we waited for permission to fight back." That was the core problem. British convoy doctrine was built around the assumption that submarine attacks would be methodical, predictable, giving officers time to assess, plan, and coordinate. But Wolfpack attacks were sudden, violent, and over before traditional command structures could respond. Captain Gilbert Roberts was an unusual man for the job he was about to undertake. At 41, he'd been invalided ashore in 1938 with tuberculosis. His lungs couldn't handle the damp, cold conditions aboard ship. So while the Royal Navy fought desperately across the Atlantic, Roberts watched from Liverpool, medically unfit to serve at sea. For a career naval officer, it was a humiliating position. His peers were fighting and dying while he sat behind a desk. But watching had given him a unique perspective. He saw what the admirals couldn't or wouldn't see. British anti-submarine doctrine was based on World War I experiences and hadn't evolved to meet this new threat. The assumptions that worked against individual submarines operating alone in daylight were catastrophically wrong when facing coordinated wolf packs attacking at night. The Navy had responded to the crisis by building more ships, developing better sonar, training thousands of sailors. All important, all necessary. But they'd never questioned their fundamental assumptions about how submarine warfare actually worked. They were trying to solve a tactical problem with technological and numerical solutions, and it wasn't working. Roberts proposed something radical: systematic tactical analysis through wargaming, not theoretical discussions in comfortable conference rooms where senior officers debated doctrine over tea, not more training exercises at sea, where officers learned by making mistakes that killed real sailors. Actual simulations with time pressure, incomplete information, and stress, just like real combat, but where mistakes only killed chalk marks on a floor instead of human beings. Officers would make decisions under intense pressure, issue orders with incomplete information, then see the outcomes calculated using naval mathematics and performance tables. They'd learn what worked and what got people killed, without anyone actually dying. They could fail, learn, adjust, and try again. And most importantly, they could test radical new ideas without risking ships and lives. The Admiralty gave Roberts permission to try. They were desperate enough to consider anything. They gave him a requisitioned building in Liverpool, a modest budget, and authorization to establish the Western Approaches Tactical Unit, quickly nicknamed WATU by the personnel who worked there. What they didn't give him was personnel. Every qualified naval officer was at sea, desperately needed in the fight. There were no experienced tacticians sitting idle who could run simulations. Roberts needed people who could calculate intercept courses, measure sonar ranges, track multiple moving targets simultaneously, compute firing solutions, and do it all under intense time pressure, while players shouted orders and demanded immediate answers. He needed people with mathematical ability, attention to detail, and the capacity to work under extreme stress. And he needed them immediately, because British ships were sinking faster than they could be replaced. He needed the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens. The young women who joined WATU came from diverse backgrounds, but none had military experience, and certainly none had any experience with naval warfare. Janet Okell, 19, was the daughter of a prominent Liverpool businessman. She'd grown up privileged and educated, attending good schools, learning languages and mathematics, but nothing in her comfortable upbringing had prepared her for what Captain Roberts was asking her to do: command submarines in simulated combat against veteran naval officers with decades of experience. Jeanne Laidlaw arrived from Scotland, with a background in chartered accountancy. She possessed the mathematical precision necessary for the work, able to calculate courses and speeds in her head while under pressure. That precision was masked by a wicked sense of humor that would later lead her to name their first major tactical breakthrough raspberry, as in blowing a raspberry at Hitler. The whimsy concealed deadly serious calculation. Laura Janet Howes, nicknamed Bobby, was born in Antigua and proved to be a mathematical prodigy. Her calculations determined whether simulated escorts would detect prowling U-boats or die in ambush. She could compute sonar detection ranges based on water temperature, sea state, and submarine depth faster than most officers could read the relevant tables. Mary Hiles was selected specifically for her understanding of team tactics from playing competitive hockey. Roberts recognized that anti-submarine warfare was fundamentally about coordinated team action, not individual heroics, and Hiles understood instinctively how to coordinate multiple units toward a common goal. June Duncan would become one of Britain's top fashion models in the 1950s, her photograph appearing in magazines across the world. But in 1942, she was calculating depth charge patterns and torpedo intercept angles, determining whether simulated attacks would hit or miss based on speed, bearing, and weapon characteristics. These weren't just clerks or assistants doing administrative work. Roberts was training them to be tacticians, to think like U-boat commanders, to understand submarine warfare better than officers who'd spent entire careers at sea. He was teaching them to see the battle not as individual ship actions, but as a complex mathematical problem involving probability, geometry, and time, and he was teaching them to be ruthless. The system Roberts designed was deliberately brutal, intentionally stressful, designed to break down conventional thinking and force new approaches. The floor of the main room was painted with a grid representing the North Atlantic. Each square was 1 nautical mile. Players stood behind canvas screens with small peepholes, unable to see the full tactical picture, just like real convoy commanders scanning dark seas through binoculars with limited visibility. Wrens armed with colored chalk became the hands of fate, marking positions on the floor according to strict rules. Green marks for U-boat movements, invisible to the players because real convoy commanders couldn't see submerged submarines. White marks for escort ships. Red for merchant vessels. Each mark was drawn and erased as 2-minute turns ticked past relentlessly. No pause button, no rewind, no timeouts to think, no second chances. Make the wrong decision and a chalk merchant ship vanished from the board, along with its notional cargo of food, fuel and ammunition that Britain desperately needed. Make too many wrong decisions and the entire convoy died. 40 or 50 ships and thousands of sailors sent to the bottom. Officers accustomed to measured decisions, to having time to think and consult, had just 2 minutes to issue orders while Wrens computed the outcomes using real naval data. Sonar detection ranges based on water temperature and thermoclines, torpedo run times accounting for target speed and bearing, star shell illumination patterns considering wind direction and cloud cover, depth charge effectiveness based on detonation depth and submarine position. Every variable that mattered in real combat was modeled in the simulations. The Royal Navy had neglected this kind of tactical study for 20 years, assuming that experience and seamanship were sufficient. Now Britain's survival depended on making up for that neglect at emergency speed, before Dönitz's U-boats succeeded in cutting the Atlantic lifeline completely. Jane Laidlaw developed the breakthrough tactic in spring 1942. After running dozens of simulations that ended in simulated disaster, she called it Raspberry. The concept was so simple, it almost felt stupid, which is often true of genuine innovations. Upon torpedo strike, the attacked ship would immediately fire 2 white rockets skyward, visible for miles, and transmit Raspberry over radio. That was the signal. No explanation needed, no waiting for orders. Every escort ship would immediately converge on the convoy's perimeter at maximum speed and sweep the area with star shells to illuminate the darkness. Star shells were parachute flares that could turn night into day for brief periods, and they were the only way to spot surfaced U-boats in darkness. Any escort could initiate the response, not just the senior officer, not after requesting permission and waiting for acknowledgement. Immediately, the moment they saw the rockets or heard the radio call. The innovation wasn't technology. Britain already had rockets and star shells and radios. The innovation was permission. Permission for junior officers to act on initiative without waiting for orders. Permission to abandon the rigid command hierarchy that let U-boats exploit hesitation. Permission to prioritize speed over protocol. It violated every principle of traditional naval command, and that's exactly why it worked. When WATU tested Raspberry in simulation, the results were dramatic and immediate. Response time dropped from 8 minutes to 90 seconds. That's a factor of 5 improvement, simply by changing doctrine. U-boats caught on the surface during attack runs were suddenly illuminated by star shells, their low profiles visible against dark water, forced to crash dive before firing all their torpedoes. Crash diving was dangerous and meant aborting the attack. Escorts arrived at the perimeter while submarines were still submerging, achieving sonar contact with depth charges ready. Submarines forced underwater became vulnerable to sonar and depth charges, losing their primary advantage of surprise. Roberts scheduled Raspberry to be issued as official doctrine in May 1943. But it was never formally published because by then it had worked so well that Dönitz had already changed German tactics, rendering it obsolete. The Germans figured out that surfaced night attacks no longer worked and adapted their approach. Success had arrived faster than Royal Navy paperwork could move. Before WATU could influence fleet-wide tactics, before admirals would take the idea seriously, it faced one final, crucial test. In November 1942, Admiral Max Houghton became Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches, the command responsible for protecting Atlantic convoys. A submarine ace from World War I with a reputation for aggressive tactics and zero tolerance for nonsense, Houghton was exactly the kind of officer who could shut down WATU with a single word if he thought it was wasting resources. Houghton had actually commanded submarines in combat. He'd sunk enemy warships. He'd been depth-charged and survived. He knew submarine warfare from personal experience, not theory, and he was being asked to take tactical advice from teenage girls who'd never been to sea. Instead of dismissing WATU out of hand, Houghton visited Liverpool to see Roberts' operation for himself. That willingness to examine evidence, even when it contradicted his expectations, is what separated good officers from great ones. Wren's Janet Okell and Jean Laidlaw were assigned to demonstrate the beta search tactic by playing U-boat commanders hunting an inbound convoy. They would try to sink the convoy. Admiral Houghton would command the escorts and try to stop them. Admiral Houghton took personal command of the escort group, standing behind the canvas screen with his peephole, issuing orders just like he would at sea. What happened next became legend within WATU, a story told and retold with growing embellishment, though the basic facts needed no embellishment. Over the course of the morning, the teenage girls sank Admiral Houghton 5 times. They identified his patterns, learning how he thought and predicted his responses. They exploited his assumptions about where U-boats would be and where they actually were. They anticipated his tactical responses and positioned submarines to exploit his countermoves. They ruthlessly punished every mistake, every moment of hesitation, every predictable decision. Houghton was a man who'd commanded submarines in actual combat, who'd sunk enemy warships under fire, who'd survived depth charge attacks that killed other crews. He understood submarine warfare at a visceral level, and he was outmaneuvered by women young enough to be his daughters. Women who'd never been to sea, who'd never felt a ship roll in heavy weather, who'd learnt submarine warfare from manuals and simulations, who approached tactics as mathematics and probability rather than experience and intuition. After the 5th defeat, Houghton stood from the plotting table. The room went quiet. Everyone knew this was the moment that would determine WATU's future. He looked at Roberts and said simply, "This works." Then he asked how many officers had been trained so far. "About 200, Roberts replied. "Not enough," Houghton declared. "I want every escort commander in Western Approaches Command through this facility. 50 officers per week, continuous training until we've processed the entire fleet. This is now mandatory for all commanders before they take convoys to sea." That was it. Houghton had been convinced by evidence, not authority. He'd seen that the tactics worked, and he was willing to mandate training by teenage girls because results mattered more than pride. Admiral Houghton became WATU's most powerful advocate. After the war, he stated that Captain Roberts and his staff contributed significantly to Germany's final defeat. His predecessor, Admiral Sir Percy Noble, was even more direct. WATU had a great deal to do with winning the war, because if the Battle of the Atlantic had been lost, the war itself would have been lost. From February 1942 to July 1945, WATU trained 5,000 officers from Britain, Canada, the United States, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, Poland, and Free France. They arrived weekly, 50 at a time, for intensive courses that compressed months of hard-won tactical lessons into days of simulated combat. Officers who'd been at sea for months would spend a week in Liverpool, running simulation after simulation, learning new tactics, unlearning dangerous assumptions. The training was deliberately humbling. Officers commanding destroyers and corvettes, men who had survived depth charge attacks and torpedo hits, men with combat experience and decorations for valor, found themselves outmaneuvered by women young enough to be their daughters. It was a bitter pill for some. Naval tradition emphasized hierarchy, experience, masculinity. Now they were being beaten by teenage girls with chalk. Some officers couldn't handle it. They complained, they made excuses, they insisted the simulations weren't realistic. But most learned the lesson WATU was teaching. U-boat commanders were smart, aggressive, and adaptive. Tactics that worked last month were obsolete this month. Rigid adherence to doctrine would get you killed. Initiative, speed, and coordination were everything. By mid-1942, officers who passed through Liverpool returned to sea with shared tactical vocabulary and doctrine. When convoys came under attack, scattered escorts could coordinate responses without lengthy radio exchanges because they all knew the same playbook. They knew the drills. They'd practiced against opponents who thought like U-boat aces because they'd been trained by Wrens who had studied every German tactic and counter-tactic, who'd read every after-action report and intelligence summary. The impact showed in the statistics, cold numbers that represented thousands of saved lives. In the first 5 months of 1943, Allied anti-submarine forces sank 96 U-boats. The exchange ratio had reversed. Instead of U-boats hunting convoys with impunity, they were being hunted. In May 1943 alone, 41 German submarines were destroyed. 41 in a single month. The loss rate was unsustainable. On May 24th, 1943, Admiral Dönitz made a historic decision. He withdrew his entire U-boat fleet from the North Atlantic. The wolf packs were disbanded. The campaign that had nearly strangled Britain was over. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. The Allies had won. After the war, the women of WATU returned to civilian life. Their work remained classified for decades, hidden behind Official Secrets Act restrictions. Janet Okell became a librarian. Jean Laidlaw returned to accountancy. June Duncan became a famous fashion model, her face appearing in magazines worldwide, but she never mentioned the war work that probably saved more lives than any modeling career. Most never spoke publicly about what they'd done, bound by wartime secrecy agreements that outlasted the conflict. The official histories focused on technology, radar that could detect surfaced submarines, sonar improvements, Enigma code breaking at Bletchley Park, long-range aircraft that closed the mid-Atlantic air gap, all important, all crucial to victory, all deserving of recognition. But the tactical innovations developed by teenage girls with chalk on a Liverpool floor, those were footnoted, if mentioned at all. It wasn't until the 1990s that historians began seriously examining WATU's contribution. Documents were declassified. Surviving Wrens were finally interviewed. The full story began to emerge from archives and fading memories. Captain Roberts received recognition during his lifetime. He was awarded the CBE for his work. Naval historians acknowledged WATU's importance. But the women who made his system work, who developed the tactics, who trained the officers, remained largely anonymous. That's the tragedy of this story. The victory was real. The impact was enormous. The contribution was crucial. But the people who achieved it were forgotten simply because they were young women doing work that the military establishment couldn't quite believe mattered as much as the real work of men at sea. The story of WATU offers lessons that extend far beyond World War II naval tactics. First, expertise isn't always where you expect to find it. The Royal Navy's most experienced officers were trapped by their own assumptions, by decades of tradition and experience that had become dogma. Fresh perspectives, unburdened by conventional wisdom, saw solutions that veterans couldn't. Sometimes the person who's never done something before can see possibilities that experts have learned to dismiss. Second, diversity of thought matters in problem solving. The Wrens approached submarine warfare differently than career naval officers. They saw it as mathematics and probability, not seamanship and tradition. That difference was an advantage, not a weakness. Homogeneous groups reinforce existing assumptions. Diverse groups challenge them. Third, rigid hierarchies can be deadly. The innovation that saved convoys wasn't new technology or better equipment. It was permission for junior officers to act immediately without waiting for orders from above. Organizations that can't adapt quickly can't survive in rapidly changing environments. Fourth, simulation and training matter more than people think. WATU didn't just tell officers what to do. It let them practice, fail, learn, and improve in an environment where mistakes cost chalk instead of lives. The muscle memory of making rapid decisions under pressure transferred to real combat. And finally, history often overlooks crucial contributions from unexpected sources. If historians hadn't eventually dug into classified archives, if surviving Wrens hadn't finally been interviewed, the women of WATU would have remained a forgotten footnote to a footnote. How many other crucial contributions have been forgotten because they came from people society didn't expect to matter? In a requisitioned building in Liverpool, with nothing but chalk, mathematics, and determination, a group of teenage girls helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. They did it by thinking differently, by questioning assumptions that everyone else accepted as truth, by approaching ancient problems with fresh eyes unclouded by tradition. They did it despite skepticism from officers who couldn't believe that young women with no naval experience could possibly understand submarine warfare better than men who'd spent careers at sea. And they did it so well that within 16 months of WATU's establishment, Admiral Dönitz was forced to withdraw his U-boat fleet in defeat, ending the campaign that Winston Churchill called the only thing that truly frightened him during the war. The next time someone tells you that innovation only comes from experts, that young people lack the experience to solve complex problems, or that traditional hierarchies are always superior to flexible responses, remember Janet Okell standing in front of a painted floor with a piece of chalk in her hand. Remember Jean Laidlaw naming a life-saving tactic raspberry while calculating intercept courses in her head. Remember the teenage girls who beat Nazi U-boats, who saved thousands of lives, who changed the course of history. and remember that sometimes the most important victories in history are won by people nobody expected to matter at all. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. There are so many incredible untold stories from history, stories that challenge what we think we know, and I'll keep bringing them to you. Drop a comment and let me know what you'd like to hear about next. Thanks for watching.